Good evening. Welcome to the Mob Museum. Our speaker tonight promises to tell us a unique story. During the 1970s, as a New Jersey State Police trooper, he joined an undercover sting operation that resulted in 30 convictions of organized crime figures from New Jersey, New York, and Philadelphia. The 3-year-long sting effectively ended mob control of the New Jersey waterfront. This, of course, was a dangerous and stressful time for the young trooper, and he developed post-traumatic stress syndrome. He came to this conclusion after spending time talking with Joe Pistone, who famously worked undercover as Donnie Brasco. He decided to change professions and ultimately became a professional basketball referee for more than 20 years. Today, Bob Delaney is the director of officials for the NBA. Besides being in town to speak at the museum tonight, he is here for the NBA Summer League at the Thomas & Mack Center in the Cox Pavilion, still going on until the 18th. In 2008, Delaney published a book about his undercover experiences that he would be happy to sign for you after tonight's talk, if you haven't already done so. As always, we are going to take questions after Bob completes his talk. I will call on people. If you have a question, if you raise your hand, I'll call on you, and one of our assistants will come over with a microphone. We need to do it that way so that it works on the live stream, so everybody can hear you. With no further delay, please join me in welcoming Bob Delaney.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeff. That's very kind of you. He did say that I refereed in the NBA. If you want to make me feel welcomed that at home you'll boo and scream and yell. Applause is not something that we're used to. It's an honor to be here and to know that we're live streaming, and I've got troopers from New Jersey that told me they're going to be watching as well. So I wanted to share a formula as we start. Everywhere I present, I start off with this formula: experiences plus intellectual readiness plus reflection equals development equals growth. And experiences are what you have and I have. And if I share mine with you, you learn from me and I learn from you. Intellectual readiness is what this museum does for organized crime. It gives you a history of organized crime in our country and understanding about it. That's intellectual readiness. And then the reflection is the tough part in our society, because not many of us are reflective. Sit back and if my boss, Mike Bantham, who's here, walked past the office, I had my feet up on the desk and I'm looking out the window. He said, "What are you doing?" I'm reflecting. That's not going to go over big in our society. But I do know if we do all three of those things, that we will have development and we will have growth. So my hope is that through this experience that you have some growth, and that the experience that I share with you is one from many years ago. 1973, I followed in my father's footsteps and joined the New Jersey State Police. And that organization is steeped in deep military tradition. It was founded by Colonel H. Norman Schwarzkopf, the father of the famed General H. Norman Schwarzkopf of the Gulf Wars. And he was a military guy who went through West Point, and he brought that West Point training down to the New Jersey State Police when it was founded in 1921. I went through that academy. And it's a 23-week resident program, and if any of you have been through the great state of New Jersey and had the privilege of meeting some of the troopers, you know that we don't wear that traditional cowboy or stallion hat that many police agencies wear at the state level. We have a military-style hat. And we've got leather going in all different directions, and you hear the name Schwarzkopf, and I guess that's why we look like German stormtroopers coming up asking for your license and registration. But, after graduating from that academy, it was a heck of a gig back then. You only worked 15 days. You worked 2 days on, 2 days off. You lived at the station. My first station was Flemington, then I went to Newton, then to Somerville. And every state police station was the same. If you walked in, it was a police station. Downstairs was our family room. It was like where we hung out and had ping pong table or pool table, TV, kitchen. And then the second and third and fourth floors were rooms, 2 troopers to every room. And we not only were the local police for towns that didn't have their own police department, we did the miles and miles on the highway, handing out the tickets and taking care of the accidents. I went to that third station in Somerville after 2 days off and walked back in. And for those that are in law enforcement, you know what a squad room's like. You walk in, and they got a little cubby hole with your name on it to make you feel good about yourself, as if you had your own office. And I walked in, and there was a note to call Lieutenant Jack Liddy, Division Headquarters, Criminal Investigation Section, Organized Crime Bureau. This guy had more titles next to his name than I ever saw. And folks, I grew up Irish Catholic. That means I wake up guilty in the morning. I thought I had a problem on my hands. I thought I did something wrong. I thought I was in trouble. And the other trooper said to me, relax, kid. Give the guy a call. You probably gave a ticket to a mob guy. He works organized crime. I called the lieutenant. He said, you're going to be in for a while. I said, yes, sir. He said, I'll meet you in that kitchen in about an hour and a half. An hour and a half later, I walked down into that kitchen in Somerville Station, and there stood an intimidating figure. Jack Liddy's about 6'4". He's got meat hooks for hands. He's the kind of guy that hangs on his lapels every time he talks to you. He's also the kind of guy that the button on the shirt has never met the hole on the shirt. He's still wearing a 16 when it should be a 22. And he had that bib tie going. You know, when guys, you put that tie that only goes about here, looks like you put it in water, maybe it'll grow. And you got the belly coming out underneath. And after a while of conversation, he said to me, are you interested in doing undercover work? I said, yes, sir. He turned and walked away. I said, Lieutenant, what is it? Drugs, narcotics? Because back then all we were doing is buy bust on the street. He said, you keep asking questions, you're going to be out of the running. Over the next 3 weeks of meetings and interviews, I learned that the President's Organized Crime Task Force, the FBI, and New Jersey State Police were joining forces. We're going to start our own trucking company on the waterfront in New Jersey. I became one of those undercover guys. And it was myself, another state trooper, and 3 FBI agents. And we started a trucking company called Mid-Atlantic Air Sea Transportation at the base of the Port of Newark in Elizabeth, New Jersey on Fairmont Avenue. And we thought we had a big operation. We had a 16-foot truck, we had a station wagon, and we had a van. And then after like a month or two, we're wondering why the mob guys aren't knocking our doors down and we're having all kinds of problems, because to law enforcement, it was a big operation. But to real society, it wasn't. And we got lucky in the investigation. Everyone in this room knows you need a little luck in life. That's in law enforcement as well. A guy by the name of Pat Kelly, who was a consigliere with the DiNorzio crew, the Bruno crime family, was jammed up. The FBI had cases on him. State police had cases on him. We were going to put him in jail, or he can come to work for us. He chose to work for us. And when he came and spoke to us the first time, he started to school us in a way, the wise guy. And he was the first one that said, I don't know what you guys are doing, because we were being politically correct, right? You got 2 troopers and 3 FBI guys, and we were co-owners of the trucking company. And Pat said, I never saw a bus going down the street with 5 bus drivers. Somebody's got to drive the bus. Something's wrong here. This is not making any sense. And you got to mimic the wise guy way. So somebody's got to be in charge. And after meetings were had and our bosses all met, the FBI and state police, it was deemed that I would become the president of a new trucking company. Pat Kelly, the informant, would become the vice president. The other trooper would become my driver and bodyguard. The FBI agents started running the trucking company, and through Pat's connections with the Genovese and Bruno crime families, at one point we started a new trucking company called Alamo Transportations in the shadows of the Statue of Liberty in Liberty State Park in Jersey City on Communipaw Avenue. We had 20 trucks hauling for us at one point. We were kicking back 25% of our profits, 12.5 to Genovese, 12.5 to Bruno. This story's been told by a variety of media outlets. ESPN, ABC, HBO. We're going to share the HBO version with you to give you layers of this story, to give you a better understanding of what this life was like, and then I'm going to come back up and share a little bit more. Ryan, if you would, please. Thanks.
No matter the sport, it's generally understood that the best of referees are never noticed. Although they're essential, they are without a doubt the most anonymous people in our fields of play. Since all the games are about the players, it's safe to assume that fans rarely, if ever, give a second thought to an official's life away from the game. That's just fine by NBA referee Bob Delaney. In light of what he did before basketball, relative anonymity is a prized commodity. Bernard Goldberg has the kind of profile Tony Soprano could relate to.
At a mere 6 feet tall, Bob Delaney, like most NBA referees, is a Lilliputian in a land of giants.
Now what do you want to do?
I want to go right here.
Giants who sometimes get angry at the Lilliputians.
Don't test me.
Well, I know
Don't
the rules.
test me. Lottie, I'm going to tell you one more time.
Okay, Bob.
Moving
Check the
forward.
rules.
Thank you.
Check the rules.
I read them a lot more than you do.
The fact is, you might get mad at a guy like Bob Delaney, as Michael Jordan once did, but given what he's been through, the Giants are never going to intimidate him, no matter how big they think they are.
I've told players, don't give me that prison stare. I don't think it's going to intimidate me. I don't know what you think you're doing with the prison stare, but it's not going to work.
So whatever intimidation they may try to throw your way on the basketball court, that's like a layup compared to what you've been through in life before that.
This is like being on vacation compared to what I used to do.
Once upon a time, Bob Delaney led a secret life. What he used to do 25 years ago, long before he became an NBA ref, was run a trucking company in New Jersey. What he used to do was hang out and do business with the mafia.
I assume you're dealing with some pretty tough guys.
Tough was always a word that I had a difficult time understanding, because if you have somebody that says to you, let's meet, we'll go to dinner, and you sit in the front seat and I sit in the back seat and now I put a bullet in your head, that's not a tough guy. That's just somebody with a different morality.
It's not a tough guy, but it's not a guy you want to be sitting in the front seat with.
And it's somebody on the street, the word they use for it is capable. He's a capable guy. Capable guys you got to be aware of.
Capable. Capable of?
Killing you. He's capable of putting a bullet in your head.
Did you know guys like that?
Yes.
Which may sound odd when you consider that Bobby Delaney grew up the son of a captain in the New Jersey State Police. He played basketball in college, but left before graduating to become a state trooper, just like his father. And he was doing well until 2 years into the job, when he mysteriously disappeared.
I had heard that he went to Florida with another one of the troopers, and he got himself involved in a murder in Florida, and he wasn't coming back.
Bob Scott was Delaney's partner on the force.
I just couldn't believe it. He was a good person. But I could see if somebody was giving him a hard time, they had picked on the wrong guy. I mean, if you wanted to get killed, he could have done it.
Bobby Delaney had gone over to the dark side, just not in the way his state trooper friends thought. He hadn't killed anybody, but he had in fact hooked up with the mob. But not in the way that you're probably thinking either. Bobby Delaney, the cop who disappeared without a trace, had resurfaced with a brand new name, brand new identity. He was working undercover for the FBI to infiltrate the mafia right here in northern New Jersey.
You became another person.
Yes, I did.
Who was that person?
I became Robert Allen Covert.
To make it all seem real, the FBI gave him a new social security number, a new driver's license. They even gave him a phony police record, which is like a letter of commendation when you're working with the mob. All under his new phony name, Bobby Covert.
Bobby Covert.
Bobby Covert.
Why didn't you just call yourself Bobby Undercover while you're at it? Covert.
I know.
You're telling me an undercover cop gives himself the name Covert?
I didn't give myself the name. When we were starting up this undercover operation, we wanted to find somebody with the same first name, the same ethnic sounding last name, as well as age grouping. So Robert Allen Covert was someone that we found that was dead at birth.
Until he came back to life as Bobby Covert, working on an operation called Project Alpha. With the help of an ex-mob guy turned FBI informant, Delaney started a trucking company, Alamo Transportation, in this building in Jersey City.
This literally was the scene of the crime.
Yes, this was our base of operations.
Using hidden cameras installed throughout the building, Delaney compiled evidence of how the mob corrupted legitimate businesses.
Our trucks are making 3 runs to everybody else's run down in the port of Newark because we're kicking back money.
So the mafia is getting a piece of the action.
They're getting a percentage of it. The line is always, nobody's going to bother you. You're with us. You're under our flag. Nobody's going to bother you. And nobody's going to bother you but us.
They get you labor peace. They get you some work. They hijack your trucks every now and then for 25%. And you're recording all the stuff that's going on here?
Right. Well,
besides the hidden cameras, Delaney also wore a wire and taped his phone conversations. In the beginning, he was sure no one was buying his act.
You have this feeling that everybody knows what you're doing, and you think you have cop written on your forehead.
Can I assume you were afraid?
Oh, yes. Yeah, tremendous levels of fear. I was very good at repressing normal reactions to fear. But as I would leave there and drive down the road about 5 miles, I'd have to pull over and throw my guts up. I would have to find the first gas station so I could run in because I had diarrhea. That's what was going on inside me.
They think you're a cop, they might give you a break, but the first thing they're thinking is that you're an informant, a snitch, a rat, stool pigeon, and they're going to kill you.
You're pretty sure about that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I know.
Joe Pistone, a former FBI agent, ought to know. He spent 6 years in the 1970s infiltrating the mafia. And in 1997, Hollywood made a movie about his life. Joe Pistone is the real Donnie Brasco, who actually crossed paths with Bobby Covert, never suspecting that he was also working undercover.
There's not much room for negotiations, you know. There's no second takes. You make the first take count, otherwise you're history.
Despite the fact that he was working with people who had no qualms about making their enemies history, Bobby Delaney was slowly coming under the grip of an undercover cop's occupational hazard.
You got to be friends with these guys.
Yes.
And friends means what? You go to dinner with them?
Go to dinner, play softball with them.
You meet their families?
Meet their families, meet their kids. I would imagine it's going to be hard for you to understand. It's going to be hard for people in the audience to understand, but they're just regular guys. Some of them are fun-loving, nice people that have really nice hearts. A friend of mine who worked undercover said, you know, scumbags are people too.
In other words, Bobby Delaney started believing that the good fellows whose houses he went to, whose families he got close to, really were good fellas.
My morality changed as far as what a bad person was on the street versus when I was a uniform cop. I said to my sergeant one day, Jack, this guy's not a bad guy. All he does is stolen loads. My mindset was, well, at least if they weren't breaking legs and putting bullets in people's heads, that's the bad guys. The other guys are just making a living.
What does that tell you?
It tells you that the street changes you, you don't change the street, and you start to become part of that world.
You're going deeper and deeper, and you're becoming the character you're playing.
No, it's not a character, that's me. Bobby Covert is who I am.
Sensing that after 2.5 years undercover, Delaney was sliding too far, the state police pulled the plug on Project Alpha. And on September 28, 1977, 30 mobsters were arrested. Delaney was there, along with members of the FBI and state police. But unlike his fellow troopers, Delaney was in street clothes.
And one guy says to me, Bobby, what'd they pinch you for? And before I could answer, Barry says to him, he didn't pinch him, he's with us. He's a trooper. And the look that he gave me was a look that wasn't anger. It was disappointment. It was, Bobby, you're my friend, how could you do this to me? I could probably tell you what everybody had on their feet the rest of the day because I couldn't pick my head up. It felt terrible.
Those feelings of guilt ate at Delaney because he knew that eventually he would have to testify against his friends. Joe Pistone, who had just completed his own undercover tour, took Delaney aside and gave him some advice straight from The Godfather.
I told him, you know, Bobby, you got to remember, this is strictly business. It's not personal. There's nothing personal involved in this. You are doing your job, nothing more, nothing less.
As a result of Delaney's testimony, almost all of the 30 wise guys arrested that day were convicted on a variety of racketeering charges. And to add insult to injury...
When it came to trials, I would get up to testify, and the prosecutor would ask me the name that you used undercover would be, and I'd say Bobby Covert. And everybody in the courtroom would start laughing, and the defendants usually didn't. They'd be looking around wondering why everybody was laughing.
The Mafia guys didn't get the joke?
They didn't get the word covert.
Bobby Delaney spent 10 more years as a state trooper, and during that time began refereeing high school basketball games, just as he had before he went undercover. And that, as things turned out, was the beginning of a whole new life.
I was starting to see another side of life that's the good side of life. And you're seeing families go to a ball game. You're seeing the competition of kids.
It sounds like when you made the transition from all that you went through to basketball, it sounds like therapy.
Basketball gave me a peace, and it reaffirmed to me all the things that are good in our society, because I was dealing with all that's bad.
Delaney quickly moved from doing high school games to the CBA, and finally in 1987 to the NBA, where his notoriety preceded him.
As Shaq is walking out to go to the jump ball, he turns around and comes walking over to me, and he said, "I want you to get me a job as an FBI agent." And I said, "You'd be excellent on surveillance, so I'll be sure to make that call. Now, would you mind going and doing the jump ball so we can get this game going?"
Bobby Delaney is 51 now, light years from his old secret life, dealing with guys who would just as soon kill you as look at you.
Is that totally a part of the past, or did that experience change you in some way that exists even today?
Oh, I definitely think it changed me. I definitely think it took a part of my personality and chipped it away for a bit. But I often told people it reminds you of the mascots. The NBA arenas, they put on that costume, they run around, you know, they get to do whatever they want. You can't do that if there was no costume. Well, my costume was I was Bobby Covert. So I got to do things that I would never be able to do in life.
So my hope is that, thank you to that one person. That was very kind to you. So That story's been told in this book, Covert. And what's interesting, when you look at this book, there's a surveillance shot on the front cover. So my picture's on the bigger one, then you see a shorter one, and it's a surveillance. And both of these guys have connections to the Mob Museum, because Tino Fiumara was my captain. He was my capo, Genovese guy that I reported to. And if you go downstairs and through the museum on the first floor where it says 100 years of made men, Tino is on, he made that wall of shame down there. And his nickname was George or T or the good-looking guy or the Greek, and you'll see all that underneath his bio. The other guy is Joey Adonis Jr. Joey Adonis Jr. is the son of Joey A. Joey Adonis, his father was part of Murder Incorporated, who was responsible for the murder of Albert Anastasia. So the history that's here in this museum is tied right on the front cover of this book. I could go on for hours telling you Soprano West type stories, but I think what is more important is to talk about what took place afterwards. While this undercover job created this opportunity to put a lot of bad people away, Tino and a lot of other folks that we put away were bad people. But what I'm able to do today is share this story, and we know that when I go and share it with the military and other cops and firefighters, that it's a story that can resonate because they're going through traumatic experiences as well. I'm going to take you to the end of the story that I thought was going to be the greatest day of my life. See, they told me this job was only going to be 6 months when we signed up. Every federal grant is written for 6 months. And I guess we had an aggressive mindset. We were going to end organized crime in the state of New Jersey in 6 months, I guess, and move on to the next thing. And obviously that didn't take place, and it's still going on. But it went on for 3 years of my life. And it went, every 6 months it was being re-upped, and I thought it was going to end. And the day of the raid, for those in law enforcement that are in the room that are listening in, you know what it's like. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, you muster up. You go to, for us, it was the Armory in West Orange, New Jersey. It's uniformed troopers, FBI agents, plainclothes detectives. You make up a team of 4, 2 uniforms, 2 plainclothes. They start going, hitting doors early morning hours and grabbing people and bringing them in. I was at that location. And, you know, I had nothing on me that said I was in law enforcement. You don't carry anything. I became Bob Covert. And there was no connection back to the state police. So when I showed up, I was 35 pounds heavier than a lot of those troopers ever saw me. And you heard what Bob, my old partner there, Bobby Scott, said. You know, they thought there was something that went bad with me. Troopers are no different than most human beings. Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story. And nobody can say we didn't know what happened to the kid. So they came up with all kinds of things. It was like being at your own funeral. You're hearing all kinds of stories coming back. And when I got there, I got assigned to Sergeant Barrelard a year and said to stay with him. And as the defendants started being brought in, they go through processing. So that's fingerprinting and taking pictures and shooting them off into the room to speak with intelligence officers to see who's going to be the next informant. And Sergeant Lardier said to me, you want to go downstairs and see what's going on? And I said yes when I meant no. And because I knew that I got to go eye to eye with these people who after 3 years of my life, they thought I was somebody else. And when I went down, that military training came in from the State Police Academy. I put myself at parade rest, got my head up, got my shoulders back, and I'm standing next to Sergeant Lardier, who's in plain clothes also, but he's got that state police badge hanging outside of his pocket like detectives do. And it was a kid by the name of Ronnie Sardella. And when I say a kid, it means he's not a made guy, because when I say Tino Fiumara, they called him the good-looking guy. The reason being, he's a made guy. There's different nuances in mob terminology that you can pick up and understand where somebody's status is within the crew. And Ronnie Sardella, I knew I stole tractor-trailer loads off the Port of Newark with them. I did car deals with them. I did gun deals with them. Committed a lot of crimes with the kid. Knew his wife, knew his kids. Been to his house for dinner. For lack of a better term, he was a friend. And after the trooper was fingerprinting him, they were putting the cuffs on him, and he saw me. And I'm standing like this next to Sergeant Lardier, and he looked at me and said, Bobby, what'd they pinch you for? And before I could answer, I dropped my hands, and Sergeant Lardier said, he ain't pinched, he's with us, he's a trooper. And the look that went between us was not one of anger, it was one of hurt and disappointment. He looked at me and said, Bobby, how can you do this to us? How can you do it to me? I'm your friend. Freeze frame, go back to St. Mary's Grammar School, Paterson, New Jersey. I was taught by the good sisters of St. Dominic, and I got caught doing something wrong by Sister Joseph Rozier. And she told me I was going to be punished. Before she gave me the punishment, I said, Sister, Jimmy DeLello's doing it too. I gave up my best friend in a heartbeat. You know the ring that says they're married to God? That's there to put welts on your head. She cracked me. She gave me a shot and said, Delaney, you don't tell on your friends. It's an unwritten rule in a schoolyard, you don't tell on your friends. And yet what we ask undercover people to do is become friends with people and tell on them. I went on an emotional roller coaster ride. 7 days after, I felt horrible about what was going on, but I couldn't verbalize it because other troopers would think there was something wrong with me, that I was being defensive about what was happening to bad people, to criminals. And about 6 to 7 days later, I got called down to division headquarters to meet with Lieutenant Liddy and Major Bill Baum, who's in charge of the investigation, all investigations for the state of New Jersey at that time. And when I walked into his office, he showed me intelligence reports from detectives, from informants, and they played a wiretap from a mob social club in Hoboken that we had laid some wire in, and they were talking about whacking me. And I tried to act cool, say that doesn't make for a good day, boss. And Major Baum was an amazing, empathetic leader. He got everybody out of the room, and he sat down with me. He said, I want you to understand, Bobby, we're going to make this right. But until we get it to where we are, we're going to watch over you. You're going to have troopers living in your home. You're going to, every place you go, you have to have state police with you. That's just the way it is. I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. And that's what I lived with for months. That every place that I went, because I had to go out and testify in cases, and I had to go out on surveillances. And in doing that, I got to know that team pretty well that was guarding me. And every once in a while, after you get to know people well, we'd stop off for a drink. And if we got back into a bar, I started going back into Bobby Covert. I'm buying everybody drinks. And John Schroth was a detective in the state police, had a background in psychology from Rutgers University. And John was the first one that noticed something was wrong. He said, what are you doing? He said, that ain't Fed money anymore. That's mortgage money. That's your money. Why are you acting like this? And you're dressed too, man. He said, you know, like, you're dressing like you're still, like, because I went back to the pinky rings and the chains, and I'm wearing the leather jacket, and I'm going in to testify in court cases, and the prosecutors are saying, you can't go up on a stand like that. You look like them more than them. I wanted to go back to that because that was my normal. And then what happens when somebody starts pointing a finger and telling you something's going on inside of you that you don't want to hear? You push them away. And I was getting paraded around after a period of time, and I testified before the United States Senate, and I would go down to Washington and share this story because law enforcement had not done something of this magnitude before. And everybody wanted to hear the story. And I didn't speak about what I speak about today. I was talking about the nuts and bolts of the investigation. And I was speaking at Jersey City Police Academy. And in the room happened to be Dr. Henry Campbell, Hank Campbell. He was a psychologist. He was my psychology professor at Jersey City State College, which is now New Jersey City University. And I use that because it makes me sound smarter if I went to New Jersey City University instead of Jersey City State College. And Hank and I started doing some informal therapy. And Hank was the first one that said to me after those sessions, Bobby, what you're going through is post-traumatic stress. I said, Hank, get the hell out of here. What are you talking about? I'm a trooper. That's a military thing. I'm reading about studies that are being done on people who come back from Vietnam about post-traumatic stress. I pushed him away. Louis Free, who happened to be a case agent on this case and then became the 15th director of the FBI, was also working Joe's case, Joe Pistone. And he knew what I was going through. And when Joe completed his job, he put Joe and I together. And while Joe and I met when we were undercover and didn't know that each other was undercover, when we got to speak to each other, it was the first time that I truly understood peer-to-peer conversation or peer-to-peer therapy. Because he knew what I was going through. He went through a similar experience, and I choose that word carefully. We don't go through the same experience, we go through similar experiences. And when I looked in his eyes and spoke to him and saw his body language, I knew he got what I was going through. And that opened the door to have the conversation because by what is personal is universal. If I'm going through something that somebody else has gone through and they can give me permission and validation to talk about it, that's what's going to open doors. So what I offer today in telling this story, General Dempsey, General Odierno, Admiral McCraven embraced this message because they knew if they could bring this undercover guy who is in the NBA over to speak with troops, we got a hook. We can start talking about this thing called post-traumatic stress and a way that maybe we haven't spoken about it before. And so I've had the honor to go to Iraq on multiple occasions, to Afghanistan. I've been every military post in the United States, Asia, and Europe, and sharing this story. And one of the things I say to them is, if I had a balloon in front of the room, how do I get the air out of the balloon? I can let this balloon go. It flies all over the room. It goes out the back door. We don't know what happens to it. Or I could take a pin, I pop it, we get the air out, but I don't have a balloon anymore. But if I'm patient and I'm willing to listen to sounds I don't want to hear, and I turn it upside down, it makes that screeching noise. You don't want to hear it. You don't want to deal with it. But eventually we'll get all the air out of the balloon. We're going to have a full balloon we can use again one day. That's us with dealing with trauma. But what do most people do? They push it down. And when you're dealing with cops and firefighters, military folks, first responders, they like to think of themselves as being able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. I can handle it. I don't need any help. And then you push one on top of another on top of another, and if you take that same analogy and use the balloon, eventually it's going to burst. And so my hope is, in telling this, is that we have a post-traumatic stress education and awareness program. The same way we did with HIV/AIDS, the same way we did with alcohol, tobacco, and drugs, we can become more educated and understand. And that was the second book that I wrote, called Surviving the Shadows, a journey of hope into post-traumatic stress, not a journey of doom and gloom. And it's my journey continued from that undercover phase about what went on with me. Because I was good at doing undercover work. We're all good at doing something in life. And I could strap on the, I did over 300 recordings face-to-face. And the recordings that I used, because we didn't want to use RF transmissions because they had the capabilities of reading, that old kind of thing that you see in movies where there's a cop out in the van. We couldn't have that because if I'm in deep cover, every time I show up and that van shows up, they're going to put 2 + 2 together. Plus, they had the ability to read RF transmissions coming off. So we got a reel-to-reel. It was a Niagara. And back then, we thought we were 007. We thought this was tremendous. Except this thing was about this big, and I used to have to put it in where you would put the cup, where you would put, I hope they can get that on screen, where I put the cup, and then I'd pull it real close, and I had all kinds of chafe marks on my legs. And I had on-off switches in my pockets, and I had 2 microphones under my armpit. Now, I did that for over 300 conversations that were recorded. And I was fine when I was doing it. And I could do the whole kiss on the cheek and hang out and go to dinner. But as soon as I got 2 miles down the road after leaving there, I'd have to pull over and throw my guts up. I'd have to find the first gas station because I had diarrhea. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my bed was soaking wet. I lived a life of fear, but I was afraid to let anybody know I was in fear because I thought they would think I was weak. And then when I come out of this job, then everybody wants to hold me up on a pedestal like I'm doing something tremendous because I was a tough guy to go up against these people. I wasn't a tough guy. I just got put in a situation and then went and did my job. But I was afraid to let that down because I'm afraid. It's what I just said very freely to you. Took me years to be able to tell people. Because if I told another cop that, they would think I was weak. If I told another cop that I didn't like the fact that I had to put this guy away because I know his kids, they would think that you're weak. They would think there's something wrong with you. But what I've come to find is that the more that you allow these kinds of things out, the more strength that you get and the less vulnerable you feel. And it's actually like weight being lifted off your body. So in Surviving the Shadow, we talk about peer-to-peer, and we create these kinds of environment. Basketball became my therapy. As I said there, basketball gave me my life back. I had no intention of ever getting to the NBA. Never was even on the radar. It's just that I knew the game of basketball had been so good to me as a kid. I played at the high school and college level. And then to be able to get back on that floor gave me an inner peace. But I couldn't play anymore. I didn't have the abilities to play at that level. And I didn't have the time to coach because I was in law enforcement. So I started refereeing. And I didn't realize at the time that it was actually helping me with my post-traumatic stress, the hypervigilance that had to take place, the endorphins that were being released by the exercising. And also I was in an environment that had boundaries and rules. The street has none. There were no rules in the street. There were no boundaries on the street. So this created a whole nother environment, and one thing led to another, and I just happened to be working a ball game at the Jersey Shore Summer League where Darryl Garrettson happened to see me, who was the director of officials at the time, and offered me to go to Loyola Marymount, where we had a summer league in Los Angeles. I figured I'd get a free trip to LA, and I'd be a trooper forever. At the most, maybe referee a college game. I never did, because from there he brought me to the CBA, the Continental Basketball Association, and I was fortunate enough to get into the NBA. And so I had 2 good runs. I got to be part of an elite organization in the state police and an elite organization in the NBA. And I know there's troopers that are watching on that live stream, and there's a lot of NBA referees that I worked with that are in the back of the room. 2 elite organizations with folks that are just amazing people to be part of. Great teams. Great teams give you the opportunity to be great yourself. And we share this message over and over with the troops, because we want them to understand that while their battlefields are Iraq and Afghanistan, my battlefield was on the streets of New Jersey, New York, Philadelphia. Because I got to be around an environment, a subculture that existed in our society that had a stronghold in these United States for so many years. It no longer has that stronghold because of the work that was done by so many willing to sacrifice time, effort, and lives in putting an end to it. So, you know, we're going to do a little intellectual readiness. Intellectual readiness is part of the formula. Who do you think, they say, has a higher level of post-traumatic stress by gender? Do you think it's men or women? Who says men? Who says women? How many did not vote? Thank you for not voting. Thank you for your honesty. What you come to find that if you become a student of post-traumatic stress, you will find that they will, studies, depending on what study that you read, will say anywhere from 1.5 to 4% higher incident level of post-traumatic stress with women over men. And I argue that it's skewed data. Where do you get information from in order to put into a report about any subject? People who are willing to speak to you. And I believe that one of the things that we stress beyond a multitude of things, but this conversation is one that I think needs to be had. And that is that we are so politically correct that when we speak about gender equality, we should understand that that is in the workplace and in society. But there is a difference between culture of man and the culture of woman. And it impacts us. Because I'll give you the example. My father was a state trooper. And you heard that lifestyle that I led of 2 days on, 2 days off as uniforms. Well, he led that when I was a kid. And when he would leave to go to work, and I remember this as almost like about 7 or 8 years old, that I would be told I was the man of the house. My sister was 3 years younger than me. That I had to take care of my mom and my sister because I was the man of the house. 8 years old. If I don't wet the bed tonight, it's going to be a hell of a night. And all of a sudden, I'm the man of the house. And I was told I couldn't cry because that's not what men do. And my mother was conceived in Ireland and born here, Irish Catholic to the hilt. She'd watched Notre Dame. She had no clue of football, but it was the Irish playing on Saturday afternoon. If I fell off my bike, bloodied my arm, walked into the house, she would be like, Robert, offer up your pain for the poor souls in purgatory. For those of you who are Catholic, you know about purgatory. That was the holding place to get to heaven. Except that the Catholic Church came out 10 years ago and said there's no more purgatory, so I don't know who the hell I was giving up all my pain for. But if my sister fell off of a bicycle, skinned her knee, they were medevacing her with a chopper to the first plastic surgeon they could find. It was a difference about how we were treated. And that comes as it gets older, because then you're afraid to show your emotions. My bosses all heard me talking about this. I would give little pieces of pieces, and I would talk to other undercovers, and I would talk to detectives. And they said to me, we want you to talk to all the troopers about this thing because, you know, this was back in the 80s, and it was like nobody was talking about the emotions of the job. And I kind of like, you know, I could relate to the undercovers, and I could relate to the detectives because I did that most of my career. I only had a year and a half in a uniform. But I knew that when I spoke to them, there was one common denominator that we all had. We all had a fatal accident. So I brought that up because I remember mine. And it was at Flemington Station. I had 2 months on the job. I was with Gary Rink, who was a senior trooper, 16 years on the job. And I don't have to go into the gory details. It was 2 kids on a motorcycle with a truck on Route 202 in Flemington. And when you get there, and when there is a fatal accident, there's not a whole lot to do. Because you flare it out, you put it up, you direct the traffic, and you wait for the fatal accident experts to come from the state police. And while we're waiting for them to come, I could feel there was something going on, because no matter how much they trained me to see homicide or see pictures, until you see death the first time, and at 21 years old for me, the first time, I led a Dudley Do-Right kind of life as a kid. I didn't see that kind of stuff. It shook me. But I was afraid that Gary was going to see my legs shaking under my uniform and he was going to think I couldn't do this job. And so he took out a cigar and started smoking. I never smoked. And I didn't think I could handle a cigar, but there was an ambulance worker that was walking by that was smoking a cigarette. So I said, hey, pal, I'll take one of those. But that cat was smoking Camel Unfiltered. I took a hit on that. I almost passed out. I went back to the state police station. I went in the bathroom, and I cried my eyes out. And I did it quietly in hopes that no other trooper would hear me sobbing. When I told that story in front of those troopers, when we took the break, over half the room came up to me and said, I've gone through the same thing. I did that. What it underlined to me is that statement that I made earlier. What is personal is universal. If you're going through it, somebody else is. But if you're willing to tell your story, you're going to validate their feelings and give them permission to tell their story. So I really think we got a hell of a bang for our buck in the government. We put a lot of bad people away, but what's more important about it, this undercover story, is that we get to tell this story over and over, and it's helping the men and women who serve us today in all branches of the service. And my hope is that the story that I shared with you has some development with the formula that we used when we started this. So we'll open it up for some questions. Yes, sir? We have to wait for a microphone because it's being streamed, and that way someone will be able to...
First of all, a big round of applause for Bob. You're wonderful.
Well, Jeff, I'm not done yet. We got another hour and a half to go. This is just the question part. We got a lot more. So
okay, here's our first
relax,
question.
folks. You got to wait.
Okay, hey, a great story. You went through through hell and back for what you did. 6 months to turn into 2.5, almost 3 years.
Yes.
Constant fear and put 30 people away. Great effort, but that stuff still goes on. 30 people come in and take their place, and the beat goes on.
Right.
Is there some disappointment to that? Is there some kind of how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, great question. While it's 30 people on the first hit, we arrested over 100 in this investigation, because what happens is you have other investigations that continue, and then you get others, and then you get somebody that's willing to gut, and they become an informant, and they give up some more, and it keeps going. So this became another 3 years of my life just testifying in courts after it was over. So I lived with this thing for a long, long period of time. One of the things that you make is a very good point, and I have taught at organized crime investigation schools for years. And one of the things is that I felt that, within law enforcement, you're taught to be the eradicator of crime. As you graduate from that academy, you go understand if there's a rapist in town, you find the rapist and you put an end to it. If there's somebody breaking into houses, you find them and you put an end to it. When you're dealing with organized crime, it's an ongoing conspiracy. You're not going to end it. So we have to change the philosophy. So what I would say to cops is that our job wasn't to end it. Our job was to keep organized crime disorganized, because any organization that's disorganized is not going to flourish. So by taking layers off, you are bringing people and creating vacuums. One of the concerns always has to be, and while we are duty-bound to always follow through, you had to be aware of selective enforcement, because there was a big difference when Carlo Gambino was in charge than John Gotti. Carlo Gambino ran it with an iron fist, and people were afraid of the potential, almost parental, to the point that, if he said something, everybody stopped. John Gotti was selling hits for $25. He didn't care. Go hit that guy. Go hit this guy. It didn't matter. They were whacking people all over the place. And usually what you see when a mob boss is doing that, he has no control. He really doesn't. Because think about, just go back to parental. The families that you see in the mall and the kids are going absolutely berserk and they have no control over their kids. There's just flat out no control. I mean, this is not hard stuff. But when you start dealing with traditional organized crime, the Cosa Nostra, Mafia, whatever term you want to give to it, this psychotic, the mindset, it depends on who gets into that top spot and the influence that it has. It can be extremely hurtful. Because I was in Philadelphia a couple hours after Phil Testa got whacked. Anybody that's a historian knows that they blew him up. the Chicken Man. And they also used a claymore mine with concrete nails. And now, for anybody that knows Phil Testa, he wasn't the best-looking guy in the world, and he had all kinds of pot marks, but he had a lot more pot marks that night when we went down there. But the difference was, this wasn't a hit. The concern that changes the whole dynamic of it is a woman walking down the street with a baby carriage, or somebody could have also been blown up. You know, a bullet is designed for who it's designed for. When you start blowing people up, who knows what's going to get hit? So it changes the whole dynamic, and it also changes and shows you that the control is not there. So from a law enforcement standpoint, you have an understanding of what's going on within the organization. It's actually falling apart.
Another question. We have one here.
What's the story on trucking in Fort Lee, New Jersey?
Well, my trucking company, the New Jersey State Police Trucking Company, the FBI Trucking Company, we started in Elizabeth, and then we had one in Jersey City. I lived in Fort Lee. They made me look like I was upscale. My undercover apartment, my first undercover apartment was in Bayonne, New Jersey, which is also known as the Beverly Hills of Hudson County, as if it's something. But then they moved me up to make me look more upscale, and I had a 2-bedroom apartment right by the George Washington Bridge in Fort Lee. Fort Lee has a lot of trucking companies. The mob has always tried to have an influence because of the unions, which is an area that they have control of. You know, I would go make collections with a guy by the name of Larry Rickey, who worked for Tino, and when we would have to go pay down on the ports. And there was a dental envelope that had to come out every 2 weeks, and you had to put $20. Everybody had to put $20 in a dental envelope. And when we got down there, and Larry would go down and get these envelopes, and they'd all be filled with 20s, and it was all the workers, everybody that worked on the port. And when we got there, one of the dock bosses said, Mr. Rickey, this gentleman would like to speak to you. It was a guy, a Portuguese guy, came over and spoke in broken English about his daughter. His teeth were not really good, and that he wanted some work with the dental. And Larry looked at him, and I'll say it in cleaner language, but he said, "You got a problem with her teeth, really?" He says, "You know what this dental plan is? This dental plan is to keep your own effing teeth. Now get the hell out of here." So their whole way about doing things is like something out of central casting, but you're sitting there and you're watching, it's actually how they talk to people, and it's how they strong-arm people. And that whole area was part of what went on for many years.
The reason I asked you, I went to a Christmas party one night in Fort Lee, and the guy whose house it was at, he was telling stories I couldn't believe. Sounds like some of the stories you're telling now. Yeah, thank you.
Yes.
At any time when you were an undercover agent, were you married?
No, I was single at the time. Yeah.
And after you no longer had troopers watching out for you, were you still afraid?
Yeah,
and was it real?
Yeah, you know, there were a lot of things put in place. Packages were never sent to our home. The state police and the FBI always gave me intelligence reports. But there came a point where I went back to the major and said, "Boss, I can't live like this. I mean, there comes a point we're either we got to figure this out. I can't be going every place I go with people living in my house and a gun in every room and radios to police and a trooper car up the street." I mean, it just was a bizarre lifestyle. And I had to make a decision. And while I'll say this, you all can relate to it. Because after 9/11, you all did the same thing. You became more vigilant. But if we didn't go out in public or didn't go to a mall after 9/11, bin Laden won. If I would have went and hid, and people have said to me, "Why don't you go in the relocation program?" I'm the good guy. I'm the guy that's doing my job. Why do I got to go hide? I mean, I had to make a decision. And I had to go make a decision to live my life. And what was going to happen as a result is just the reality. So we're vigilant. You know, I'm aware. My story is almost 40 years out now. I mean, it was 1975, 1978 during that time frame. 2009, I had to go back and testify in Brooklyn Federal Court to put Michael Coppola back, who's a associate of Tino Fiumara, who's here in the museum. So I think that we all have made those decisions in life. Mine was just maybe a little bit more unique, but I think we all make those decisions that we just got to go ahead and live, even though there's some levels of fear. Now, I told that same answer to a sports writer one time when he asked that question. And Bennett Salvatore, who was here, a fellow referee, was sitting next to me. And at the end of it, after I gave that presentation, he said, "That's all good. But if you notice, nobody stands next to Bobby during timeouts on a basketball court."
Do we have another question? Right up front here.
We saw you were talking about how you thought there were, cop was labeled on your forehead, and that was there ever a point of comfort, of an epiphany moment where you're like, they're buying it, they like, this is, I think I got this.
Yeah, there hits a point where you're too comfortable, and the way I can describe it to the way of sports is that when you're in a locker room, you can't wait to get out of the locker room to go to play. As a player or as a referee, you're churned up. You want to go, and you feel it. Well, that's a good thing, because I had that same kind of churning feeling when I would put the wire on. But then it got to the point that was so norm to me that I lost that, and that wasn't good, because now I lost that sharpness, and I wasn't as concerned, because I knew if they found that thing on me, they were going to think I was an informant and I was going to die. But then I got so comfortable with them, and I got so comfortable doing it that I lost that edge. And one of the reasons that our bosses knew it was time to start, I went to Florida and had a meeting with Johnny Key Simone and Russ Buffalino with Pat Kelly, the informant, and never told anybody in the state police that we were going. We got a call on one night. The next morning, we're on Eastern Airlines heading out of Newark Airport down to Florida. We're at Joe Sonkin's Gold Coast restaurant in Fort Lauderdale. And my bosses went berserk the next day because I'm telling them, and I write in a report up, and I'm thinking it's great that I'm giving this report about all these guys, and they're like, that's our decision, that's not your decision. You don't get to make those decisions. We may have wanted to have surveillance there, plus the fact we don't know where you are. So it got to where I just became so ingrained to be Bobby Covert. To me, it was Bobby Covert was going down because they were going to open up lines for the trucks down in Florida. So it wasn't about, to me, the criminal thing. But there you got Johnny Key Simone, who was a captain in the Bruno crime family, and obviously Russ Buffalino, who was one of the 5 majors, and we have no really surveillance on it.
We can't post a picture like this without asking at least one basketball question.
Sure.
What player gave you, there are plenty of players that yelled at you. What player gave you the most bang for your buck when it came to an intellectual debate on the court?
Oh, there were many players a lot smarter than me. If David Robinson asked you a question or Kareem asked you a question, those cats were a lot smarter. You were afraid to give them the answer because they got a lot smarter than you. There is the talent level in the NBA, and you wish that folks could see the interactions that go on, because while these kinds of things happen on the court, we're a small group. There's only so many players. Back then, there was 22 teams in the league, 24 teams in the league. It's a small. Everybody knows each other, and you just get to know them as folks. It's not that they're basketball players. You know them as people. You know their family. You know their kids. So we get in the way of their win, is what they get mad about. It's our calls. So it's not personal at all anytime. And for those that are in the room, my boss in the back, Mike Bantam, played in the NBA, played on the Olympic teams. Joe Crawford, who's probably one of the more recognizable NBA referees, is in the back there as well. Mark Wunderlich, Bennett Salvatore. Bernie Fryer played in the NBA and also refereed with us. And, an honor. I'm excited and honored that they came, and humbled that they took time out of their day to be here as well. Yes, sir.
We have one more here.
We may get Joey up here yet.
As I've watched the NBA over the years, there's always been this topic of discussion about referees seem to favor the high-dollar players as the game moves along. You watch the game, you go, wait a minute, you know, it looked like somebody was doing exactly the same thing as he was doing. He didn't get called. I think I know the answer to my question, but I assume there's no favoritism. But during the game, I mean, were you in a position where, should I make that call? Should I not? Do I make up calls? So does any of that stuff go on, or is that?
No, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. No, it doesn't. And what I would offer to, I try to say this, well, I wish I could bring everybody out on that basketball floor with us so that you could see it, because if folks think that we're that good, we need to leave our brains to science, because if we're that good to say, oh, wow, that was so-and-so, we're going to do this for him and do this, and now I'm going to make this up, and then I'm going to go down and make this. I mean, my brain's not that good. And I know these guys real well, and I know their brains aren't that good. So it's no way we could do all what is being, it's amazing to us. We sit back and like, I can't believe they think we're that good. I mean, it just doesn't happen. At times, people say that a superstar gets all the calls. Well, think about how much time the superstar has the ball in his hand. So he has it for a larger percentage of time, so the likelihood is that he's going to get fouled more because the team is deciding to give him the ball, not us. So we're reacting to what they give us. And that we hear these things and we understand that they're out there. But I would rest assured that it's not taking place.
So before we get into specific plays and specific playoff games, that's a whole nother can of worms. But please, a round of applause for Bob.
One more question.
We can take one more. We'll wrap it up.
This gentleman's had his hand up. It'll come on.
I'm old enough to remember Red Auerbach and Sid Borgia. Who was your nemesis?
Well, I'm old enough to remember Red Auerbach and Sid Borgia as well. Red, the stories about Boston Garden were true. If they lost, we didn't get hot water in our showers. And our locker room was so small that only 2 referees could fit in there. And we thought when we went to 3-person crews that we would get another person. All Red did was put another big concrete nail in a wall where we could hang another jacket. I mean, so those stories are true. And Sid's son works with us now. Joe Borgia is with us, and he's in charge of the replay center up in Secaucus. So, yeah, that's back history. If I could just close with a thought. There's a couple of quotes that I try to say to myself every day, but one sits over my desk, and it's that the true measure of a person is not where he or she stands at times of comfort and convenience, but rather where he or she stands at times of challenge and controversy. And those words were spoken by Dr. Martin Luther King many years ago, and they ring true in every aspect of our lives today, especially with what's going on. With what's going on in Minnesota, with what's going on in Louisiana, with what's going on in Dallas. I heard a great line. If we are being selective about what we're feeling bad about there, we got to take a look at ourselves. Because everything needs to be changed. Everything needs to be examined. We need to change things in our sphere of influence. Where you can change something, you make that change. That's what leaders do. It's easy to lead when it's all good in the hood. But where we have a sphere of influence, and if each one of us does it, it's going to make that change a little bit throughout our society. It's an absolute honor to be here. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks to the Mob Museum. Thanks for you all being here. God bless. Stay safe. Thank you.